What's up, guys? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I'm going to break down some big news that came out involving Tesla's sales data for the USA and other parts of Europe. What's going on with earnings that just came out, as we just got Alphabet and Google announcing earnings, and that's causing a bit of a sell-off in the market right now. Not to mention more data for tomorrow as I talk about the share prices for Tesla and the others. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total. And the offer ends very soon at the end of March. Anyways, as far as Tesla's going, it was trying to hold its 200 EMA. I was saying yesterday I was expecting a green day in Tesla, and that's what happened so far today. So yes, Tesla was very resilient, holding 386 to 200 EMA. But the question is, can Tesla try to continue this push? There might be a small pullback that comes to the market that could drag Tesla a little bit lower temporarily, but Tesla is still looking very resilient despite some bad news that came out. So I'll talk more about the share price in just a couple of minutes. I first want to talk about some big news. So, as far as the tariffs go, as a reminder, okay, Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico in the beginning. This yet led to a lot of negotiations. So, the tariffs on Mexico and Canada got delayed, which is what helped the stock market scream to the upside. We saw a lot of buyers that stepped in as a result of that. Those tariffs were delayed, but the Chinese ones were not. The Chinese ones have been imposed, and now China is retaliating. So, this is very important because they have some retaliatory tariffs that have come out. The authorities in Beijing have imposed 15% tariffs on U.S. oil and liquefied natural gas exports and a 10% charge on American oil and agricultural equipment. So it's very important to remember this is affecting the U.S. markets to some extent. OPEC has not responded yet, but if they do say something that could affect things, and then as a result of this, these tariffs did put some pressure under Tesla. The reason for that is because they mentioned, and this is what China was talking about, how they may be increasing tariffs on not only Teslas, but also particularly items involving their factories, the Cybertrucks and factors just like that. So there were some fears involving that. Despite that, the market was very resilient. We saw a small sell-off before we saw some buyers defend anyways. Same thing happened to Tesla. It sold off just a little bit right here, only to get bought back up. So buyers still defended Tesla despite that. There's also some bad news that came out involving the American sales and also European sales. So for January 2025, Tesla registrations in France fell by 63%. In Sweden and Norway, they also fell by 44 and 38%. Unfortunately, there have been some declines, and it could be because of many different factors. One could argue it's because of politics, because of how demand in Europe is being impacted, like given the states of the economies, and also it could be because of people waiting for the Model Y refresh. There's a bunch of different factors involved in why this is happening, but it's not just Europe. If you look at the American sales, okay, even though right now we're looking at about 49,000 Tesla sales possibly in the USA, at least for the month of January, just note that this is still technically a decline compared to 2024. Year to date, they're down about 10% over the same period. And that's something that's worth mentioning. Looking at their total sales, you guys can see that this January is the second best January in their history, but it is technically a decline compared to 2024. We're seeing the same thing on this chart right here. We're hoping for something much stronger later on. But just know this, guys, I'm not really too convinced that this guarantees anything about the whole year, because just because we had a weak January, it does not mean that the rest of the year has to be weak, especially with the Model Y refresh coming and a lot more sales growth for the summertime, because summer tends to be a lot stronger. So yes, although it's not good that Tesla sales have declined a little bit, at the end of the day, I just want to say that Tesla still has plenty of time to make a strong comeback. And I still remain very, very optimistic. I still think Tesla will break their record with deliveries, especially as we end up getting the refresh and then more data coming out for the months of February and March. So I still remain optimistic, guys, and we'll see how things end up going, despite the fact that for the short term and so far, the sales have been on a slight decline. So Tesla has tried to offset this to some extent by reducing their leasing prices for the Cybertruck AWD and the Model 3 in the US. So that's something very, very important. You guys can see that right now we're looking at a 17% decrease in the price of the all-wheel drive Cybertruck, 17% decrease in the Model 3 long range. Same thing with the others at a 12.5% decrease for the long range Model 3. very, very interesting stuff. Slight decreases here and there. So hopefully this helps more people acquire them, try them out, and this could help their sales to some extent. And we'll see what else Tesla is doing. Tesla probably realizes that, yes, their sales may decline, but the Model Y refresh is coming. And then once that comes out, guys, there's going to be a big boom in sales next month. So don't worry. I'm not scared, guys. Give it some time. We need more data to make some conclusions. Now, the market was very resilient. Despite all the tariff news, we saw big tech try to make a comeback. Looking at Google, Microsoft, Apple, Nvda, Tesla, Amazon, big tech tried to make a strong comeback. And despite that, we're actually seeing a small sell-off right now because of what's happening with big tech earnings. So this could lead to a small pullback for Tesla in the market tomorrow morning, but it might just be a very temporary move. So let's talk about this. Why is there a slight sell-off in the after hours? We had AMD, Alphabet/Google, and Snap announced their earnings. Tomorrow we have Walt, Disney, Uber, and then Ford, by the way. But for now, we're just going to focus on these three over here. Starting off with Google/Alphabet, unfortunately, we saw them miss on some of their earnings. They missed on revenue expectations. So their EPS for Q4 was at $2.15, beating expectations of $2.13. However, revenue for the quarter reached about $96.47 billion, coming short of the $96.56 billion expectations from analysts. So this came out below expectations, causing a little bit of a dip. On top of this, you have to remember that that's what overshadowed the EPS beat. Then when it comes to their streams of revenue, despite the fact that the YouTube advertising revenue was at $10.47 billion, beating expectations, their Google Cloud revenue was technically below expectations at $11.96 billion. That is below the $12.19 billion we were expecting. So that ended up coming in a little bit below expectations. The overall outlook was so-so because of the fact that they saw a revenue miss, and this led to some fears here and there. They're also going to be spending tens of billions on AI, and there were some questions about that from investors and a lot of headlines, despite the fact that that is, typically that would be bullish, but because of the revenue miss that was accompanied by that, that made investors a little bit more apprehensive. That's why the share price of Alphabet is currently down. Just to show you guys, Alphabet/Google is currently down about, I think like 7-8%. Let me just double check. It's currently down 7% right now, so that took a big hit. AMD is also down about 9% right now, so it took a big hit. Why is that? Well, when it comes to AMD, okay, they announced their earnings, and the numbers were not as strong as they may have seemed. So actually looking at the numbers right over here. So overall, their chip revenue grew 24% year over year to a record $7.66 billion for the year. However, when you look at their Q4 earnings, they were at about 482 million, or that's the overall revenue, or 29 cents per share. That's actually down from 667 million or 41 cents per share a year earlier. So relative to the previous year, this is actually a decrease in their earnings year over year. Now, when you adjust for the numbers, yes, it technically is a bit of a beat, but when you don't adjust, it's actually a small decline. So that's the thing that made investors very apprehensive. And then on top of this, there were some questions about their overall data centers, how they're kind of like, getting more revenue and factors just like that. And then there were some concerns involving DeepSeek. They were talking about that as well, about how there might be a lot more competition, especially considering the fact that they're planning on just ramping up with AI spending. So that's what led to some fears. The way that they're using their money, what's happening with their data centers, and the fact that their overall earnings were technically a decline when unadjusted relative to what we saw last year. So there was not really enough to wow investors. That's why AMD is down almost 9%, unfortunately. That is what led to the sell-off. Snap, on the other hand, did relatively well. We saw a beat of earnings with a profit of 1 cent per share above the expectation of a loss of 4 cents per share, with their sales at 1.56 billion, technically above expectations. Not bad. The overall expectations were still pretty decent for guidance, so that's why the share price is up. Besides that, guys, just two more things, and I'll talk about the charts. So tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, February 5th. There is one thing that's worth mentioning. At 9:45 a.m., we have the S&P Global Composite and Services PMI. Might cause some volatility, but I do expect high volatility tomorrow because we have very important data. We have the ISM Services PMI, business activity, employment, and new orders coming out. Will this cause the market to bounce and pump, or will the market get a rug pull? This is a very important sector for understanding the state of our economy, to understand how businesses are doing when it comes to services. So get ready for some high volatility tomorrow at 10 a.m. The market is still fearful. There's still fear that's present. Momentum is still at fear, despite the fact that the market got bought back up. And the put to call option ratio is going up as we're still seeing more shorts piling into the markets. With that being said, we'll see how things are adjusted. So let's now just focus on the charts from this point on. What do I think is going to happen tomorrow? But as a reminder, Tesla is very resilient. Why is it resilient? Because it's holding its 200 EMA at 386 for now. Now, when you zoom out of Tesla, there's technically a bearish wedge that's been developing. Tesla has been consistently making lower highs for the time being. I'm a big bull for Tesla's long term for the end of the year and next year. I'm very bullish. For the short term, though, Tesla is technically on a bit of a decline. Now, for what I think is going to happen is there might be a small attempt to bounce. The way this might go is there might be a decline right here because of the fact that the market may sell off in the morning because of Google/Alphabet's earnings and factors like this. But as long as Tesla does not lose 386, this could slowly just kind of consolidate like this and try to make a move back up to try to fill this gap up here. It may attempt to do something like this. And if Tesla does this, I would not turn too excited because what might end up happening is we might get a rejection, and then this may eventually start to slow down as time goes on like this. The reason for that is because technically it is a bearish wedge, and these typically do lead to more downside moves as time goes on. So please be very careful. There might be a move just like this. So I expect some consolidation right over here. We might see a small decline in Tesla tomorrow at 386, maybe a bounce back up to 390 and some consolidation to start things off. As long as we don't end up losing 386, I expect us to consolidate for some time. We'll see if we get one more pump to fill this gap before Tesla starts to decline. But the overall setup is technically a bit more bearish on Tesla as we're making lower highs. Tomorrow, look for a small pullback back down to about 386 or below, a bounce back up and some consolidation like this. Then we'll see if we come up to fill this gap or not later on. It is still very possible Tesla tries to make a move like that, but that could be just another liquidity grab before this thing starts to decline and we start to see a little bit of a pullback. This is not the end of the world, guys. It's another buying opportunity coming to Tesla because the long term remains very, very bright and bullish. This is just a short term projection because we're technically in a bearish wedge, and that typically suggests downside will eventually be coming. So keep that in mind, guys. This is what I'm essentially anticipating for Tesla for the time being. A little bit of consolidation in this range, especially when you look at our daily time frame. The daily is still looking decent, so we might consolidate and maybe try to get a temporary push to fill this gap. It could still happen before we see more temporary downside. But even if Tesla does pop to fill the gap, I would still be very careful with it looking at this setup. Unless we get a true breakout, I'm still going to be very, very concerned because of the fact that we have a bearish wedge. That's the honest short-term assessment that I have. That does not make me a big bear forever. It's just a temporary thing. And we'll see how Tesla responds as time goes on, especially as we get more developments in this market. For other factors out there, we have other stocks such as SPY. So SPY is also very resilient, okay? What's good about SPY is the fact that if we could manage to break past 602, you're looking for an attempt to push back up to 605, then eventually the all-time highs. If we end up losing support at 600, you're looking for 598, then 595. If 595 fills us, we could be dipping back down to not only 590, but 584. So there's a bullish and a bearish case. What I think is going to likely happen to SPY is we pull back just a bit, back down to 598 if 600 fails us. And we'll see if we get a bounce back up from there, back up towards like the 602 plus area or a retest of this move. Why? Because every time we dumped, SPY got bought back up and there's a lot of buyers trying to defend it. Might be a small pullback either to 598, if not 595 because of the big tech earnings, but then we could be looking for a nice V-shaped recovery because of what's happening, at least as time goes on. Let's look for a small pullback tomorrow to 600. If it doesn't hold us, I'm looking for a move to about 598, but then buyers should defend it between 598 and 595, so keep that in mind. For the QQQ, same thing. We're making lower highs here, continuing to reject. We're looking for support at 521. If that fails us, we could be on our way back down towards 518, then eventually at the 516 area, which is where the support is. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up dipping back down here to where this imbalance is, and we'll see if we get a big bounce off this or not. So watch that very closely on the QQQ. Might get a small pullback because of Google and because of AMD missing on earnings, seeing a bit of a sell-off. This may sell off just a little bit back down to 520, if not the 518 area. Look for a slight sell-off, and as long as we don't lose these lows here, it could just be another higher low that's about to be made before this thing tries to bounce back up, once again remaining very, very volatile. There's going to be other factors that affect this, but I'm looking for a move just like this as the most likely possibility. Make sure you look at resistance at 525 and 528. If we end up losing 516, we dip back down. For now, I'm going to be looking for a pullback then a bounce as the most likely possibilities. For the Russell 2000, we look bullish. We're going to be looking for an attempt to get back up to higher levels. We could pull back down to about like 226 or so before we try to bounce back up to 228. So watch these levels very closely as we're technically holding up very nicely. Might be a small pullback before this tries to bounce as the QQQ is also looking very resilient. On ES is technically on a bit of a downtrend here, but it's also very resilient, trying to make higher lows for the shorter term. So I think that we will eventually try to push higher. Might be a temporary move back down to about either 6,025 to 6,000, a little bit of a dip there, maybe during either the pre-market or in the morning. And then we'll see if we hold support and then try to get a rebound right back up to push towards these highs, back up towards 60.60 and then 6,100. So look for a small pullback back down towards the lower 6,000s, then a potential bounce as the most likely possibilities. On NQ, we're looking for 21,500 below, back down towards 21,400. Then we'll see if we get a big bounce back up towards 21,750. I anticipate there's going to be a small dip right here towards 21,500 below. Then we could be looking for a bounce back up towards 21,700 or above like this. NQ might be looking for a temporary pullback with what's going on with these other factors, but then as time goes on, this will slowly start to get bought back up and start pushing. So just give this the time it needs. For Bitcoin, Bitcoin's on a bit of a downtrend right here, making lower highs. There's a wick forming here, but typically what happens is you start to retest those lows before we get some kind of break. I want to see if Bitcoin could hold these lows at 94,000. It's possible it dips just a little bit more, but as long as we don't lose 94,000, we could try to bounce back up towards 101,000. As long as we don't end up losing the lows, we're going to be completely fine. Now, Nvidia is looking promising to me. Why is Nvidia promising? Okay, I don't like the fact that it didn't hold above 120, but what's good is we're trying to form a base here. It's showing more and more signs of that. With all the negative news involving the tariffs, it's still held 115-ish, very close to that range. So I would say this. What's going to likely happen tomorrow is something like this. Temporary pullback to 116 and some consolidation like this before. If we break 120, then we could be trying to look for a push right back up like this. So it's still holding nicely as long as we don't lose or close below 115. I favor some consolidation, maybe a bounce as the most likely possibilities. So we'll see how things end up going. Once again, for Tesla, we have a gap to fill above. Might dip a little bit tomorrow morning towards 386 or a little bit below that, then consolidate for some time before we see an attempt to bounce to fill that gap. But then even if we do bounce to fill the gap, the more medium term is kind of like bearish for Tesla. So keep that in mind, guys. We still have this bearish wedge. So that may lead to more downside for the medium term, but the long term still remains bullish despite that. I just think it's another buying opportunity for Tesla. Apple saw a bit of a sell-off because of all the fear involving the tariffs, but now it's trying to rebound here. As long as we don't lose this low right here at 226, we could try to bounce. Our 0.786 retracement area is going to be at 227. Might see a small pullback here before it tries to bounce back up, so watch to see if that ends up being the case. This could be forming an inverse head and shoulders, so it has potential to bounce. Look for a small pullback towards 230 and 227, then we'll see if we get some buyers that defend us, so give it some time. For Netflix, we look a bit more bullish. If we end up losing the support right here around this 980 area, we're looking for a dip back down towards 965. As long as we're holding support, we're going to be looking for an attempt to break into the 1000s. This is forming a nice accumulation, so I think that this is looking bullish, and we could be on our way to higher levels on Netflix as long as we don't end up losing support. So I think it might be retesting 1,000. We'll see if we break this. We're holding support so far. As long as we don't lose 980, if we do lose it, we're dipping to like 956, by the way. But as long as we're above this, we favor upside even more. For MSTR, we're also looking so-so. Might be retesting support right here at 335, and then we'll see if we get a bounce. 340 to 335 could be tested before we see some buyers defend it, so just keep that in mind. For Celsius, we're on a bit of a downtrend here. We need to try to get back above 23. Otherwise, I could be looking for the lower 22s. So it might be dipping towards 22 before we see some buyers defend it. So just keep that in mind. For Supermicro, we have a nice bullish divergence here. I want to see it try to reclaim 29.6 to bounce. Otherwise, it's going to most likely just consolidate between 28 and 29. Then we'll see if we see a breakout towards the 31 area. So look for some consolidation, some sideways price action before some buyers defend us towards 31. Keep that in mind. Palantir is currently at this 104 area, and we have support down here around this 100 zone. So watch these levels very closely. We might be dipping to 100, and we'll see if we get a bounce or not. So give this the time it needs. For Rivian got a rejection right here. We're watching this resistance at 12.89 and basically 13.01. We also have support at 12.6 as our support. So I think that Rivian is trying to break out here. It might dip towards the 12.6 area before it tries to bounce to 13. I might be looking for a breakout right here. As long as we don't get back into this wedge, this could be a sign it wants to break out. You guys notice that we've been in a wedge for quite some time. So we'll see if we get this breakout on Rivian or not. There is potential for try to push even higher. For others out there, we have SoFi looking a little bit more bearish. It's excuse me, it's just barely holding 15.15. We got to see if that holds, or else it could be dipping towards like the 14.8 area before it tries to bounce. Might be a small dip here before we see some buyers defend it, but it's looking a bit more bearish to me. Like I said before, AMD will gap down. We'll see if we can reclaim 110 or not. If not, we're dipping to 105. Looks a bit more bearish after earnings, unfortunately. ARM has some tough resistance at 164. I think it's bullish, very, very bullish. Might come down a little bit to retest and grab liquidity at 160 before it tries to continue to push. But ultimately, I think it may continue to uptrend for 168. Coin is barely holding 277. If that fails us, we're looking for 272. If we break past 285, we're looking for a bounce. Might be a small pullback to 272. So we'll see how things go. Amazon has support at 237. That fills us. We're looking for 234. If we break past 242, we're looking for a bounce. I think we temporarily dip back down to about 237 and eventually 235. And we'll see if we get a bounce or not off these levels. So watch it very, very closely. That's going to be very key for how we end up moving. Meta is starting to dip, so we're watching 700 to see if it holds. If it does not hold, we're looking for a dip back down to about 689, and we'll see if buyers defend us here or not. But overall, there's going to be a bit of a dip right over here that's coming. For Microsoft is once again at this support right here. We have to see if we can hold above 408. We also have this resistance at this 414 area. If that breaks, we're looking for an attempt to get back up towards 418. So watch and see if we can hold support right here. If we break past 412, if that's the case, we're looking for essentially 418 as our target. There might be a small bounce on Microsoft. I think what's going to happen is we consolidate for a bit. We dip like this to about 408, consolidate like this before we see some kind of bounce, which I'm starting to favor a little bit as it's trying to base. Look for a small dip and some consolidation, then a bounce as time goes on. Google slash Alphabet is going to be dipping to about 191. We'll see if that holds. If it continues to fall, this could drag the QQQ and SPY a little bit lower. So just be careful, guys. GameStop is looking a little bit weaker. Could be dipping back down to 25.5. AMC, as long as it's above 3.17, we're looking for 3.25. DJT is stuck in the middle. Might dip towards 30 flat before it sees some kind of bounce. The VIX is once again at support at this 16.73 area. This is a nice support, though. I mean, if it loses this, we'll see about that. It might get a small rebound first, which means the market may pull back just a bit. But then if it gets a rejection again, then that could favor that the market's going to bounce. So it might be just a temporary pullback in the markets because of that. I'm not too worried about the 10-year or the dollar. They're both looking bearish, but it's not really affecting the market for the time being. With that being said, guys, for Tesla, look for a small dip in the morning. We might be dipping to about 386 again, if not lower, before we start to consolidate. Then we'll see if we get some kind of bounce later on. That's just a technical move. For now, we're going to be watching this key data tomorrow at 10 a.m. The ISM services data is actually going to be big, so get ready for a big move once it comes out. Until then, guys, I thank you all so much for listening. Have a good rest of your day. I'll be back tomorrow morning before market open for another update. Until then, have a good one and peace out.